Hi, this is Dennis Dalton, Safety Officer, and this is our quarterly safety meeting, May 28th, 2024. Our next quarterly safety meeting will be August 27th, which is the last Tuesday in August. Let me get my pointer here. Okay. Today's topic is going to be takeoffs, landings, and touch and go operations. Because we're on quarterly now, we had a couple incidents, and we hadn't really addressed those, which was the end of last year. Actually, I think one was late summer, early fall, and the other one was, I think, in December. Brendan Rowland is going to talk about those as he has firsthand knowledge of those two incidents. What I'm going to do is just make a presentation of items of some things in review about takeoffs, landings, and touch and goes. First of all, we're just going to go over the SOPs for solo and then pilots that have more than 200 hours. Standard operating procedures for wind speed. Solo student pilots shall not fly when the actual or forecast crosswind component for takeoff or landing exceeds 10 knots. Solo student pilots shall not fly when the actual or forecast surface winds exceeds 20 knots. This bracketed item here is actually what's on the annual standardization test that refers to these two items. And the way that's worded there is maximum takeoff landing wind components are 20 knot max, including gusts, 10 knot wind, a crosswind, and solo student pilots shall not perform touch and go landings. Of course, that's quite a range in there. And so again, those are depending on the instructor and the student and how that works, except for solo student pilots shall not perform touch and go landings. Okay, this section down here, pilot shall comply. This is for pilots that have 200 plus hours. Pilots shall comply with maximum crosswind components for each pilot rating and make and model aircraft posted in the aircraft checklist. Flight will not be initiated if surface winds are forecast to be greater than 30 knots, and flights will be terminated as soon as practicable if surface winds exceed 30 knots. On the standardization test, that's kind of referred to by this bracketed item, maximum takeoff, which is the correct answer in that case. Maximum takeoff landing wind components for 200 plus hour pilot is 30 knots max, including gusts, and referring to the flight manual crosswind component. So just starting out as a reference with that. So now it's, well, this is a review for everyone, of course, and it's like, well, to know what the wind is doing now, you can ask for a wind check anytime and often without breaking your concentration on landing the airplane. This is from last Saturday. I mean, well, relatively speaking, today's Tuesday, the 28th. And the top bar here, of course, is the METAR, and then this is the TAFs in hours. So I'm just pointing out here that the SOPs refers to TAFs, but the TAF you can see here was wind from 230 at 17, gusts 32. The METAR, which was what was really happening at the same time, this was the forecast. This is what was actually going on. Wind was 250 at 28, gusting 38. Now, so that relationship there, sometimes this is certainly a lot worse than what they were forecasting. If that tends to keep up like that, then you could pretty much expect down the line that that could be the case. Also, it could be the opposite, where the actual METAR is better than this TAF. But in any event, comparing these two is one of the first items you would do to begin to assess your flight of the day to see whether you think what you need to be looking out for. Okay, now over here, too bad my head's in the way down here. First of all, this is a JEP airport plan, and as you're probably going to say right away, well, what runway is this? This is an older JEP airport plan before they changed the runway from 1.2 to 1.3 due to the magnetic variation change, the magnetic headings changing more than 5 degrees, and this is now 3.1 instead of 30. So now instead of having 1.2 and 3.0, you have 1.3 and 3.1, which is certainly a item for confusion. But in any event, what I wanted to show on here, which is why I had the JEP one up here, was the position of the windsock. The windsock's always going to be on the left side of the runway of the approach end because that is where the pilot is sitting most of the time. And now this is not always true for smaller airports, but as you can see, the windsock emblem right here by my little red dot for runway actually now 1.3, and then this is the windsock here for 1.7 right. Coming in on 3.5 left, here's the windsock here. Coming in on 3.5 right, the windsock is right behind my forehead. The windsock here coming in on 1.7 left is right here. Those are your last line of defense, and really, okay, and here's 3.1 right here. And so you should be looking for those because, these are 2-mile runways, right? And so you got to, from this end over here to this end over here is probably 3 miles. Now, and you say, well, if you ask for a wind check or you are looking at where the wind's coming from on these TAFs and METARs, it was my understanding that I have seen that reporting apparatus over here. That's where I thought it was. And so while that's a general indication of what's going on, because there is a hill here, which creates a lot of funny stuff going on, that doesn't necessarily mean that's what's going on over here. So, your last line of defense is the windsock, really. And as you know, in taxi instructions for nose gear aircraft is always neutral. The mnemonic here, and you can read these, and you learned all these when you were a private and everything, is dive away from, neutral elevator into the wind. So neutral elevator into the wind, which means to the left if the wind's coming from the left. Neutral elevator and turn to the right if the wind's coming from the right. You're diving away from the wind if it's coming this way, diving away from the wind if it's coming this way. And so you go, well, and you're not even moving very fast. So what do you think's going to happen when you move faster? Of course, this is right out of the FAA's book. This is takeoff. And we're just going to go through this really quick on takeoff roll. Apply full aileron into the wind. Rudder as needed for direction. You get going faster. Hold aileron into the wind. Roll on upwind wheel. Rudder as needed. Wind's coming from this way, depending on the strength of the wind. That keeps the airplane from not chattering upwind here and moving along. So you're putting more weight onto the upwind wheel, or the downwind wheel. No, upwind wheel, sorry. Hold aileron into the wind as you go faster. Bank into the wind, because now you're getting into flying speed, and it's now considered your banking. Where here, when you don't have enough flying speed yet, you're trying to put all the weight on the upwind wheel. And then as you rotate and get off the ground, you would crab into the wind. So as you're landing the airplane, you're going to do this in reverse. You're crabbing into the wind as you approach the runway. As soon as you're getting very close to the runway to land, and you're still obviously flying the airplane, you're banking into the wind and rudder as needed, which is a slip. because if you bank into the wind, it's likely you're going to have to use some opposite rudder to stay straight. As you begin to touch down, you want to touch down on the upwind wheel first. Hold the aileron into the wind, roll on the upwind wheel, rudder as needed. And then as you're slowing down and you're eliminating, you don't have any more flying speed at all, is full aileron into the wind, rudder as needed for direction. This is a view from the front, which if the wind is coming from the right, going to the left, crosswind landing should look like this. I'm calling it a three-pointer, but it's really 1, 2, 3, not all three. I know that a three-pointer is referred to as all three at once. But anyway, so notice the windsock in the background, wind coming from the right going to the left. That means the upwind main wheel touches down first. As the airspeed decreases, yoke deflection increases and elevator increases. Then the second wheel touches down with less and less flying speed. This will just, if you're holding your aileron here, this will just fall down by itself when it's done flying. Lastly, as it dissipates even more, the nose wheel then will drop, but you are with increased control deflections as required, which is what that says behind my head. In other words, you should be at a full stall landing, and in this particular case, the yoke completely turning to the left, full deflection to the left, and probably some right rudder. This is a 15-knot crosswind right here, which is a maximum. Well, 17 is maximum for that aircraft. Okay, so while there's no perfect method for determining maximum wind and gust factor, you should fly into, here's a few things to consider. I know these are all review, but total gust factor, if it's gusting, you know, what was that? METAR was 28, gust 34. Add half of the gust speed, which was 6. So half of that was 3, and add that to your approach speed. Adding 3 knots to your approach speed in that particular reference to that. Wind direction versus runway direction. Look at the windsock on final. Recency of experience, knowing your limitations. You can ask for a wind check. We will talk about that in the next slide or two with when it refers to wind shear. Give a pilot report of any noticeable and sudden airspeed change. That's when a wind check, if there are pilot reports for a what the tower has determined is a wind shear alert, that's when a wind check's very helpful. Most of all, avoid the temptation of using other pilots' success as an indicator of safety. And of course, this is a trail dragger, a big heavy one with very stiff gear. You'll notice there's a little puff of smoke right here, which means he's landing, not taking off. I have learned to do this. This is the most, in my opinion, the most difficult and challenging for me was being able to plant an airplane of that weight on an upwind wheel like that. And keep it's almost always counterintuitive, but if you can do that, tricycle gear, if you have the control authority, you can pretty much, it's a lot easier because the center of gravity is in front of these wheels instead of behind them, because this is a very unstable situation here. But the only way to do it, you cannot land you can't do it any other way. Now, as far as landing the aircraft, this was one of the incidents I'm just simply showing, this is the nose gear on a T-41. This is the bulkhead back here. This is a bracket here, goes around the nose gear strut, and then it has this clamp arrangement around the front. You know, if this airplane had, it's pretty rough use, but it is a rental, and 1902 November. This is what happened to it. And there's things that you need to be checking on these aircraft, even though that would not seem to be the normal things to check. But since you were not the last one, you didn't fly it last, you have no idea what happened. And anything can happen. In this particular case, the bulkhead, well, it's not really the bulkhead bracket, but it's this bracket that wraps around the nose gear, which is this one. If you turn it around, it fits right in this gray spot here, with the head of the bolts here and the nuts on the back. There's the bulkhead bracket right there. It's completely detached from the strut, but you can't see it. Here's the front of it. The right picture shows the front half of the bracket, two broken ends. Look at the brake points. The right one looks cleaner than the left, which, this is really part of a pre-flight issue, but it also, and Brendan will talk about this one too. And it's if everyone is aware, everyone can look for these things. It's just the nose gear gets dropped down before the airplane's done flying, and sometimes kind of hard. Things happen, and that's what happens. And if this one wasn't seen for a while, and then this one really wasn't going to hang on a whole lot longer because there's a lot of stress there. Another thing is thunderstorms and this time of year. And of course, the cloud base, if the storm is traveling this way, you're going to have wind pushing the thing this way. As this virga or rain comes down and it hits the ground, it spreads out in two different directions. And that's the microburst, which is when it hits the ground and starts to spread and ends up with all these turbulent up and down drafts on these two ends, depending on how big a storm, how fast it's moving, and whatnot. When the wind speeds differ by more than 15 knots, a warning for wind shear is given to pilots. If there is a wind shear out, that's when I would ask for wind check. And usually you will get a pilot report when you ask for a wind check, or you can ask for pilot report if there is wind shear warning. A microburst is a type of shear associated with convective precipitation. Typical this time of year, a typical microburst occurs in the space of less than 1 mile horizontally and within 1,000 feet vertically. The lifespan is about, what's behind my head is 15 minutes. Here's a little graph here, 1,000 foot, typically 1,000 feet, and then 1,000 feet this way. The scale really isn't the scale here, but touch and go operations. When comparing a touch and go to a standard landing, both procedures are very similar in the way they're executed, with two exceptions: the intention of the maneuver and what happens after the wheels have touched the runway. So let's talk about why someone would do that. A touch and go is a maneuver in aviation where an aircraft lands on the runway and immediately takes off again without coming to a full stop. Here, so this is not a go around. This is a touch and go, intentional maneuver. Here are some key points about touch and go. Saves time. It allows you to practice multiple landings in a short period without stopping. Also allows the controllers to fit you in when some heavier machinery might be on final and they haven't got time for you to sit around on the runway. You need to get on and get off. Training efficiency. Student pilots benefit from maximizing airtime during flight training. Proficiency maintenance. Experienced pilots use touch and go to stay proficient in landing skills. If you have to do 3 takeoffs and landings to a full stop, that's not touch and go. But it is good practice, but it is not to a full stop. That is why the recency of experience for night is full stop, not touch and go. Also, full stop for last 90 days or 180 days, depending on which SOP you're operating under. Situational awareness, frequent landings, how pilots stay aware of the position and busy traffic patterns. Now the challenges and disadvantages are a lot stronger here. I mean, incomplete stop during touch and goes, pilots don't learn to bring the aircraft to a general complete stop or exit the runway after landing. Different sensation. Takeoff roll starts while the airplane's still rolling, providing a different sensation than starting from a complete stop. Potential errors include rushing the process, skipping checklists, failing to maintain stabilized approaches, and losing positive aircraft control after touchdown. Let's talk about a couple of those. A memorized or mnemonic checklist. In a T-41, you don't have a lot of things going on, but flaps, mixture, and carb heat. You really wouldn't have carb heat unless you're flying the 172. Anyway, flaps are probably going to be a lot more than you're going to be using for takeoff. Mixture, you may have enriched it or something. I've had students go to Pueblo, which is only 2,500 feet lower, and had trouble in certain planes. There was an issue where it wouldn't fly very well because they had it leaned out too far during cruise to fly down there, and then they got down there and they were doing landings or touch and goes, and was not developing very good power. It was too lean and wasn't running very well, and so having to reset things is important. So somehow you don't have a lot of time, and the thing is, a runway length, 2-mile long runway, you got plenty of time, plenty of room, but you're still rolling at 60, 70 miles an hour, so you haven't got an inordinate amount of time to get out a checklist while the airplane's rolling, and that's a very dangerous place to be at 60, 70 miles an hour because it's not a car. Those are pretty small tires to be doing that, and especially if there's any wind at all, your control inputs would have had to maintain what they were in order to stay in the center of the runway to begin with. So there is a lot of things to consider here when doing a touch and go. And runway length, one more thing I'll say is that, most of the runways on the Front Range here are 4,500 feet. And while these airplanes land, 800, 900 feet, maybe 1,000 feet, you're going to eat up a lot of that. And you may, by the time you get around to taking back off as a touch and go, you're going to see some things at the departure end of the runway that you never saw before on a 4,500, because that's less than a mile, which means it's probably about a little more than a third of these runways here at KCOS. And so touch and goes, you have to know what you're going to do. And you don't want to do a touch and go if you land halfway down the runway. That's not a smaller runway. You don't want to do that. So those are some strong considerations. Now that we've kind of covered all that, Brendan's going to talk about the 7473 November, which had an incident, which it wasn't really a touch and go, I guess. But again, I don't have firsthand knowledge. Brendan has that, and he's going to, maybe have a little interesting things to say about it. And again, maybe you wanted a student, or maybe you want to do a landing, and the wind is such that it's not a landing anymore. It's either you hit the ground and didn't mean to, and now you want to get out of Dodge, or else you're doing a go around. And again, I wasn't there for that one, and I think it was, as he described it, to be maybe something closer to that. But you get close to the ground and you got to make some decisions, because once you get down to commit yourself, you really need to know what you think might happen, so you don't end up with a problem. Okay, so that's the end of this presentation discussion, and then if you're there for the live thing, you would have gotten that with Brendan, but we won't really have that for this presentation. So that's the end of that for this quarter's presentation on landings and touch and goes. This is Dennis Dalton, Safety Officer.